Okay, so we have a lot more spoilers. Not just the one promo update, but there was a big update with a lot of actual Prelude 2 cards, and so let's go over them. I did the corpse on a separate video, you can see that up there, but yeah, I Preludes and projects, I'm going to do the rest here. So we have I think 16 total to get through, or 15, so let's get started. And let's start with the new Preludes. So in the spoiler, there's one that we already talked about, Applied Science. I talked about it in my 2 previous videos, those are up there too. But yeah, let's talk about the other one, and let's begin down here with Colony Trade Hub. So I mean, this is pretty 1 energy production, 3 titanium, and whenever a colony is played you get 2 MC. So nothing crazy. You are working towards your 3 energy trade, you get 3 titanium, which lets you play more colonies, or even trade, but I hate trading for 3 titanium or 9 cash for that matter. So only if it's worth it you have your first trade there. And the colony thing, I mean, how many colonies are placed? 2 or 3 per player, so in a game with many players this can be really good. In a game with 2 players it's not much. It's a really, I think this is an underpowered Prelude in a 2-player game, and it does come well with Poseidon, but yeah, I think this is good for a game with lots of players basically, which is not something that Preludes cared about before, because now that we have blue Preludes, that's going to happen more. The Preludes that are good depending on the number of players. So yeah, next up, going up, Nobel Price, and I think this might be my least favorite. So I mean, you get a wild tag and 2 victory points, so I mean, you don't really care about victory points early, but it's, I mean, it's 2, it'll count. But you'd rather develop your eco, right? And then it draws 2 cards with requirements. So that's the problem. Oh, and it also gives you 2 mega credits, which, what's the point? So you get 2 mega credits, 2 cards with requirements, 2 victory points, and a wild tag. Now the wild tag is good for the requirements because it'll actually help with a lot of the requirements, but the problem is that most of the requirements are either tags or minimum parameters requirements. There are very few that are maximum, which are the only ones that you can play at first, so you're probably drawing 2 cards that you can't play for a while. And yeah, I think that's the main problem. And cards with requirements, they can be good, but they're really good when the later they come, they're better. So even the early cards, something like Adapted Lichen, or no, Lichen, which like comes in really early at -24, or one of the earlier temp ones for plans. Yeah, those are all really underwhelming. So yeah, I don't like. I mean, it does give you 2 victory points, 2 mega credits, which just don't really matter, and the wild tag. So the 2 victory points and the wild tag, it's something. But I'd rather do like Research Network, which, I mean, it doesn't give me the points, but it gives me production, 1 production, and it gives me 3 cards, and I take 3 cards. I take 2 cards over 2 cards with requirements any day. I take 3 cards over 3 cards with requirements even more. So yeah, I think this one's just underpowered and not fun, because putting victory points on a Prelude, like, who cares? Now next up, Old Mining Colony, and I actually think this one's pretty good. You have to discard a card, which is essentially like paying an extra 3, unless you have another Prelude that draws you a card and you want to gamble on it being a bad card, or one of bad card, well, multiple bad cards. But if you think of the value, like a colony is 17 and a Preludes should be around 21, so yeah, colony from the start is really good, and the titanium production is also good, so I like this one. The discard a card, I mean, it's whatever, it's like 3, but the titanium production and a colony for sure are good. But yeah, so far we've seen a lot of colonies, and not a lot of turmoil and Venus, especially not a lot of turmoil in terms of the cross expansion stuff. Well, yeah, I think I like Old Mining Colony without it being too powerful, like, it's fine. And finally, Focused Organization, and I think this one's great. So I mean, you gain 1 card and 1 standard resource, which is probably a titanium. so that's not much. But then every turn you can discard one card and spend one standard resource to draw a card and gain one standard resource, which means you can throw away cash and gain titanium, which is essentially like getting 2 money production on the Prelude, but you're also getting a card draw, like an extra card draw. You just have to keep a bad card or discard the one you like the least, or with a lot of card draw, you'll always have cards that you want to discard. So if you have something like AA Central or Mars U or Olympus Conference, then this gives you one-time draw a card per turn, essentially, plus turning one rare credit into titanium, probably late in the game into plants. So I really like this one. It's a creative blue skill. I think it's generic, like it can go with any strategy. And yeah, this is probably my favorite Prelude so far. Alright, next up, let's look at the project cards that were revealed with Prelude 2. And I think all of them. So let's start with the least exciting one, which is Ceres Tech Market. So Science Tag, Space Tag, it basically lets you discard cards for 2 instead of 1. So again, if you're with a science strategy, this is probably good. Like, you get twice as much money for all the cards that you don't play, and at the end of the game it's a little extra cash that might let you play at an extra victory point. It also comes with a victory point, and it gets 2 points per colony you own, so that's probably not much. You can play this late in the game for sure. You can just not throw away cards, and maybe get it when you have 3 colonies. And so at that point, then it costs 6 plus 3 to buy it is 9. And it's 9 for a victory point, and it'll probably get you at least like 3 or 4 more with its skill. But it could be more, so that's like a bare minimum, I think. And then you're paying like 5 for a victory point, which is fine, and you're getting a science tag and a space tag, which is good. The only downside, if you have this card, you can discard a card to like make time and take advantage of this skill, because it's a 1 time per turn. So it's not that you every time you sell your Surfall 2, you just sell all of them together and get 2 for each. And actually that's kind of an underrated thing in Terraforming Mars, just discarding a card to make time. So yeah, could be an issue, but this is just basically in a way a cheap victory point. But I like it. I like the design. Next up, let's see Ishtar Expedition. So this costs 6. It requires Venus to be at 10% at least, and comes with 3 titanium. So that basically pays back for the card, because the card's gonna cost 9, and you get 9 in titanium back. And then you draw 2 Venus cards. So it's essentially a free card as long as you have a space tag in your hand that you can play, or you draw one, which with Venus is likely, and you draw 2 Venus cards. So I think this one is really good. It's one of the cheapest draws there is. And it goes with a Venus strategy, I think, because we added so many expansions that the Venus cards got diluted, and MSI and Celestic are going to be really happy with this. So yeah, I really like this one. It's a draw for 0. It's crazy. And if you get any discounts, it's a positive cash draw. Okay, next up, another one I really like. LI Trade Terminal. And so this just does 2 extra steps on all your colonies when you trade. Whichever one you trade with. And it also has 2 victory points, and it adds 3 resources to different cards. So that's the tricky part. You probably want the colony effect early, but the victory points is something you'd rather play as late as possible, and the 3 resources you'd rather play when you can gain 3 victory points for it. But honestly, I think so if you manage to do 3 resources for 3 victory points, 25 for 5 points is fine, even if you only get 1 or 2 trades like that. If you play early and maybe you get the 2 victory points, and say you can only get like 1.5 victory points out of the 3 resources, then it's 3.5 points, but every time you trade from very early, and there are no requirements here, you get 2 extra steps. That means if you have a colony on a colony tile, you get the 5th step every round plus the colony bonus if you trade there, and only you can do it. Everyone else is getting like the 3rd and giving you the colony bonus. So a simple example is Luna. So every turn you could get, so a simple example is Luna, and so every turn, if you have a colony there, you get 2 production from the colony, and you can get 10, because it's the 5th step, plus 2. So 12 plus 2 production, you're getting 14 every turn. Well, every other player would only get the 3rd step, which is 4, and they'd be giving you 2. So that's the thing. If you are the only one with a colony there, no one's going to want to trade there, and it's going to be so good for you. Now, Luna is not the best example because people tend to place colonies on Luna, but if you're going for a microbe strategy and no one else is, like Enceladus would give you 5 microbes every turn. 4 plus the colony bonus if you have a colony there, and the same thing with Triton. Triton would give you 4 microbes every turn. And if you're going for a plant strategy, you'd get 5 plants every turn plus 1 plant production. And so basically, you just make whatever colony you want amazing, and you don't make it amazing for anyone else because they would still be low and they would have to give you the colony bonus. So I love this card. I think it's really great. It's totally worth the 25. It's undercosted probably. Like late in the game, it could mean like if those 2 extra steps are 2 animals, and you happen to have 3 other cards where you can put resources that are 1 point, these can be 7 points and basically give a large convoy a run for its money because it's also cheaper. So probably my favorite card in this spoiler. Okay, next up, the one like looking at it without reading it seemed like the most exciting one, but actually it's probably the least exciting one. So you get space and building tag. Scientists have to be in power. You draw 2 cards, and then you get 1 mega credit for every unity tag plus colony. So that's Jovian, Venus, Earth. So this is basically a cheap 2 card draw. So it's kind of comparable to Ishtar Expedition, with the one caveat that you have to have a lot of tags to do it. Well, Ishtar just does it immediately. You have to have the scientists, and it doesn't draw you cards with tags, just random cards. It does have nice tags, so you can also use this to turn steel and titanium into money while drawing 2 cards. But yeah, I saw all those symbols on that card and it looked really exciting. There's 5 tag symbols on this card. Plus a colony and a science party, which is separate from all the tags, so it does a little bit of everything, but it really just, you'll pay 10, you can use titanium and steel, you get a big rebate, because you might get more than 10 even, and then you draw 2 cards, so it's 2 cheap cards at the end. And finally, one I thought was really interesting, this red Appeasement. So it says it requires that the reds are ruling, which is easy enough, and then it just gives you 2 production, but it requires that no other player has passed, and you immediately pass after playing this. So basically, you want to make this the last action in your generation, but you have to do it before anyone else passes, which is really tricky. However, like 2 production for 1 mega credit is just insane value. This pays off in 2 turns, and then it'll give you just as much extra cash as possible. He's a great card for like Pre-Star or other corporations that benefit a lot from the reds, but it's totally worth it to just use your free delegate in the first turn to put it on the reds, use your free delegate in the second turn to put it on the reds, and at that point you don't even need them to be in power because you can just have 2 delegates there and play this in the second generation, or just 2 generations after you buy the card, but it should be early because it's an income card, right? And yeah, definitely don't pay 5 for the extra delegate in the first generation just so you can play it in the first, because that's actually worse in every way than just getting the free one in the second. You're paying 5 more to get 2 more, so you're losing 3. So don't do that. But yeah, it's really easy to get it in. You just need 2 delegates on the reds, put them there, and you're going for income. If you're something like pre-start, you're doing that anyway. The only tricky part is the do it before anyone passes, and it has to be the last thing in your turn. It's so cheap, so you want to like place, ideally get a really good expensive card, something like Earth Catapult, play that, and then play this for free, and then pass. But yeah, really interesting card and a mechanic that hadn't been introduced before, so I'm really happy with that one. Okay, but let's get to the promo spoilers. And there's been quite a few. I like most of them, and there's some that I like just to insane levels. But let's start here, Cyberia Systems. So, building tag, steel tag, steel production, and copy 2 building tags. So a lot like that science card that does it in the base game, but you have to copy 2 different building tags. And it costs 17. So expensive for sure, but you can get crazy amounts of production with this one. Yeah, like if you have like the mining areas, like you could get basically 3, but they're also like MedLab, I think it's one of my favorite ones to copy. The only caveat is that you have to have 2, and it's a little expensive, so this is something that it's tricky to find the right spot to play it, because it's production, but a little too expensive, and you need to have played 2 good building tag production cards already. And I assume it does, I can't read that part, but I assume it doesn't let you, it's 2 other, you can't copy this one, I would assume. So that was fun. It's just a little tricky. Like it's an early mid-game Gen 3-4 card, I think, most of the time. Then we go to these Prelude established methods, and this is my least favorite card in this whole spoiler, not counting the corporations. And so it's just gain 30 and then immediately spend at least that much on standard projects. It doesn't actually say that in the card, but there's a rule clarification in the update that says that. I hope they change the text in the card, because the card just says 10 play standard projects. It sounds like I could discard a card for 1 and just get 30. But no, you have to spend at least that much on standard products, and this card, I don't like this Prelude. I don't think I'd ever keep this, basically. Because think about it, what standard products are good early? Not the city, not the greenery. The ocean can be good in Tharsis for the 2 cards, or if you have a card with ocean requirements, so you could do 2 oceans for 36, but then that's just straight up way worse than Great Aquifer. The other thing that I like to do is a colony. So you could do ocean and colony, which is basically there's a card called Iceman Colony that does that, but it does it for 23, so that's 26 instead of a Prelude, and you'd be doing it for a Prelude plus 3, so that's a value of 24. So that's one of the best scenarios, basically. One that I would like is the energy, but the energy just combines badly with oceans and colonies, because if you do ocean and energy, that's 29, so you have to take another standard project and then just spend all your cash. So you can't do energy with this Prelude because of the way that's up with oceans and colonies. It gets to 28 with colonies, it gets to 29 with ocean. And the other thing that you could do is get 3 energy production for 33. So that's slightly worse than power supply. So it's basically... Oh, and then you could also do 2 Venus steps, but that's worse than that one that was revealed on the first day. I don't know the name, but it's like the Venus Prelude. It just does either 2 oxygen, 2 temperature, or 2 Venus, and it draws you 2 cards with floaters, and the 2 cards with floaters are just like great. So I don't like this card. I don't think I would ever keep it. It is flexible, like it goes with everything, but it does everything a little worse, like standard projects do, and that's why you avoid them early. Next up, you have Giant Solar Collector, and this is just 2 energy and a Venus step. I don't think it's it reminds me a bit of that Aquifer Turbines, which is 2 energy and an ocean -3, which is exactly the difference between the standard project costs of Venus and ocean, except the Venus one is probably more overpriced than the ocean. But yeah, it's fine if you're on a Venus strategy. Like if you're playing Venus and colonies, it's actually, and you're on a Venus strategy, it's actually good because you're working towards your colony trading, and you get a Venus step that you might need to play a card for with requirements. But it's I think as a Prelude, this is just fine. Like nothing crazy. Probably like below average, honestly, and below average even considering that it's a niche strategy when you're doing Venus. Otherwise, it's just bad. Okay, but let's get to the ones that I really like. The last 3 spoilers I love. So let's start here. Hermetic Order of Mars. So this gives you 2 for 10. There's a maximum of 4%. But you also then get 1 cash back for every empty space next to one of your tiles. To all of your tiles. So it's a really cheap way to get 2 production. And here's the thing that I really like, because I find that when you play with all the expansions, there are so many niche cards that you can just get a hand of niche cards for particular strategy or very late cards, and you basically get an empty hand to begin with, which is really hard to play with. Like one good example of this is like Winter Sports, which, you know, it gives you, I think, 2 production too, but you need a city next to an ocean to play it, so it's like, okay, maybe I'll ever get to play it, and it's not even that good then. And so I think it's really good to have these cards that are sort of generic good cards at the beginning, like, you know, this is just like different versions of Acquired Company, basically. And this one's really good, and that's I really like that they add that, because you really need to increase the balance of basic good cards, good early cards, to keep the game functioning with all those niche cards or particular strategy cards that have been added. So, but think about it. If you have 2 tiles that are completely separate, that's 12 surrounding tiles, as long as you don't place them on an edge and no one has placed, which there aren't many that early. So you could basically get 2 production for 1 when you consider the card cost. Now, a more likely scenario is that you have only 1 tile, and so that'll be like getting 5 or 6 back, which puts the cost at around 8. So that's 1 better than sponsors. Sponsors costs 9. So it's still good. It doesn't have the tag. Or that you have 2 tiles next to each other, and if they're next to each other, you have a maximum of 8 empty tiles around them. So if you have 2 tiles, you probably get to play this for 6, which is exactly like 3 cheaper than sponsors. So I really like that it mixes with tags. This is great with something like Mining Guild. It's original. It's good for every strategy to play this at the beginning. Ecoline can also benefit a lot from this. Ecoline needs production early, and if you get a greenery in the first generation and get to do 2 production for cheap, then that's great. So I despite how generic it looks, I love this card. Then we move on to Homeostasis Bureau. And this might be my favorite heat card, which is not saying much, because heat sucks. But, so you get 2 heat production for 16, which is very pricey. But this is essentially the price of activating underground detonations the first time. So, in terms of that, it's really bad, but then you get 3 back for every temperature step. Which is great. And it doesn't have to be when you trade your heat, it can be from asteroids too. And think about it, there's 19 temperature steps, so in a 2-player game, each one should get 9 or 10 steps, so that's a bonus of 27 to 30 on this card. But the thing is, if you're playing heat, and you are because you're playing this card, you'll probably get closer to 2/3 of the heat steps. So maybe 12 or 13, and that's 36 to 39, which is just an insane bonus. This is my favorite hit card for sure. It's a heavy investment early, but it'll pay off. It'll pay off for sure. And like, just, I mean, you're getting a rebate of 3 when you play Demos down. Now it's weaker on games with 3 or 4 players. So on 4-player games, you're getting a lot less from it, but you're still getting enough. Like 1/4 of 19 is 5 or 4, so you're getting. Let's say you get 5 because, or 5 or 6 because you're playing hit. So that's 18 back. Like, the card pays for itself eventually, and it gives you 2 hit production. However, it's not my favorite card. I think my favorite card of everything that has been spoiled is Kaguya Tech. And I'm probably going to do a video just for this card because I think it's insane. And it's really creative. So, costs 10, you get 2 production, a card, and then you change one of your greeneries for a city. You don't lose the oxygen step, you don't lose your TR or your income that you get for that. You just lose the point that you would have gotten at the end of the game for that greenery and place a city. It's also a city and plant tag, which is really nice. But this is awesome. I mean, the 10 for 2 on a card is pretty good, but think of how you can trick your opponent. You can place a greenery, let him place a city next to it, wait for him to place greeneries next to your city, and then change your greenery for a city for $10. and you're getting probably that back because it's gonna give you 2 income in a card, and so you're basically taking 1 point from your opponent because you're taking the greenery that was next to his city, and you're losing the point for your greenery, but you're gaining a point because you put a city next to his greenery. And if he has 2 greeneries that you can get adjacent, you're actually doing a 2-point swing for 10 while getting production on a card. And so it's not only that I think it's really good, especially in the hands of an experienced player, it's just that it creates these, the same thing that happens with like energy tapping or birds, where you have to play the whole game thinking, what if they play this card on me now? And so you can set up traps for your opponent, or you can just play it at the end of the game at the most painful spot. I think the maximum you can get out of this is a 6-point swing, but I'll do a video on that, or a 4-point swing for 3 other players. So yeah, I think this card is just awesome. I'm gonna do a whole video for it soon. I think it's one of my favorite cards in the game already, and it definitely changes the way the whole game is played. I'm not saying it's overpowered. I mean, it is very good, but it's not gonna be an AI central. But it does affect the game the way energy tapping and birds do, where you have to think, okay, but what if they play this on me at this point? But anyway, that's it for the spoiler. Tomorrow we get a horizontal card, which could be a prelude, probably a prelude, maybe a project. And yeah, let me know what you think, and I'll see you next time.